You didn't stop caring. You just stopped breaking. The anxiety isn't as loud anymore. The attachment doesn't pull the same way. The questions that once kept you awake now fade into silence. And that scares you because you don't recognize this version of yourself. But listen carefully. This is not emotional loss. This is not distance from faith. This is the moment Allah steps in and says, asterisk, you've carried enough. Let me take it from here. Asterisk. If your heart feels quieter lately, calmer without answers, and less desperate for control, this emotional shift is not random. It is a sign Allah is taking over. Stay with me, because what you're feeling right now is sacred. There comes a moment when change arrives without asking your permission. You didn't prepare for it. You didn't plan it. It doesn't follow logic or timing. One day, your heart simply stops reacting the way it used to. The same thoughts appear, but they no longer shake you. The same memories surface, but they no longer dominate you. This shift feels unfamiliar, almost unsettling, because it was never initiated by effort. It arrives quietly, like something higher stepped in. At first, you try to understand it with reason. You ask yourself why the intensity is fading and why the urgency feels muted. You wonder if something inside you has broken or gone missing. You replay moments where emotions once overflowed, trying to locate where they went. But nothing feels wrong, only different. The heart feels lighter, not empty. And that difference matters more than you realize. Before this shift, everything felt loud inside you. Thoughts raced faster than your breath. Emotions demanded attention constantly. Even silence felt heavy, filled with unanswered questions. Now the noise softens without explanation. The mind slows down, not because everything is solved, but because something deeper has taken control. The calm arrives without victory or closure, and that's why it confuses you. You didn't wake up one day deciding to be strong. Strength simply replaced struggle. The effort to hold yourself together is no longer there. You're not fighting the same internal battles, not because you won them, but because they no longer need to be fought. Something removed the pressure from your chest without announcing itself. That kind of relief never comes from the self alone. This shift often happens after exhaustion, when the soul can no longer sustain control. You carried worry for too long. You held responsibility that wasn't yours. You tried to manage outcomes meant for divine hands. And when your heart finally reached its limit, the change arrived, not as collapse, but as intervention. This is not giving up. This is being relieved. What makes this moment difficult is how quiet it is. There is no dramatic sign, no clear explanation. Just a gradual easing of the grip emotions once had on you. You still feel, but feelings no longer command you. You still care, but care no longer consumes you. The heart learns a new posture, one of restraint without suppression. You may notice that the questions don't disappear, but their power does. The what-ifs still exist, yet they no longer dictate your peace. Thoughts pass through instead of settling in. This is not avoidance. It is permission granted to the heart to stop chasing certainty. The mind rests because it no longer believes it must solve everything to survive. At times, this shift feels almost like distance from yourself. You wonder where the intensity went, where the urgency lives now. But nothing has been lost. What changed is your position toward your emotions. They no longer sit on the throne. They no longer decide your state. Something else now governs your inner world. This change does not mean you stopped caring deeply. It means you stopped carrying what was never meant for you. Care remains gentle instead of desperate. Concern exists without panic. Love exists without fear of collapse. These are signs of alignment, not detachment. The heart begins to trust without gripping. You may even feel guilty for the calm. You ask yourself how peace can exist when nothing is resolved, why you're no longer drowning when circumstances remain the same. This guilt comes from believing suffering was proof of sincerity, but the heart is learning a new truth that peace can coexist with uncertainty when reliance shifts. The most surprising part is how natural this new state feels once it settles. At first it feels foreign, but slowly it becomes familiar. You begin to recognize yourself again, but without the heaviness. You realize this version of you is not weaker, it is steadier. The heart feels anchored instead of reactive. This shift also removes the urge to constantly explain yourself to yourself. You stop analyzing every feeling. You stop interrogating your own reactions. You allow emotions to pass without labeling them. This freedom does not come from indifference. It comes from trust, forming quietly beneath the surface. Nothing external necessarily changes when this happens. The same people exist. The same situations remain unresolved, yet your relationship with them transforms. The heart is no longer begging reality to be different. It stands grounded, even while waiting. That stability does not come from answers, it comes from surrender. This is often when you realize how tired you truly were before. You didn't know how heavy your heart had become until the weight was lifted. You thought the tension was normal. You believed the anxiety was just part of caring. Now you see the difference between concern and burden, and the heart chooses the lighter one. You may also notice a reduction in emotional urgency. You no longer feel the need to act immediately on every feeling. You pause naturally. Space appears between emotion and response. That space is sacred. It is where wisdom enters, and wisdom does not arrive unless the heart is quiet enough to receive it. This shift teaches you that not everything requires reaction. Some things require patience, some things require distance, some things require trust more than effort. The heart stops running and starts listening, and listening changes everything without force. There is a sense of being held that accompanies this change. Even if you cannot explain it, you feel less alone inside your own chest. The pressure to manage life softens. The need to control outcomes fades. You are still present, still aware, but no longer overwhelmed. You might find that your prayers become simpler during this time. Fewer words, less desperation, more honesty. You don't need to convince. You don't need to plead. The heart speaks quietly because it trusts it is heard. This simplicity is not weakness, it is intimacy. This shift also removes the fear of losing control, because control no longer feels necessary. You realize how little was ever in your hands, and instead of terrifying you, that truth comforts you. The heart rests, knowing it does not have to orchestrate what it cannot command. Eventually, you understand that this change was never about emotional shutdown. It was about emotional alignment. The heart was gently moved from the center of control to a place of trust. What once felt like collapse reveals itself as care. What felt unfamiliar reveals itself as protection. And when you look back, you see that this shift came at the exact moment you could no longer carry things alone. It did not arrive early, and it did not arrive late. It arrived when the heart was ready to release control. That is not coincidence. That is mercy. There comes a point when the heart quietly releases its grip on outcomes. You don't announce it. You don't even fully notice it at first. You simply stop pushing reality to move faster. The urge to make things happen weakens. The need to control timing softens. You still desire good, but you no longer chase it with tension. The heart begins to breathe without force. Before this change, every delay felt personal. Every unanswered moment felt like rejection. You tried to connect the dots, to predict what would happen next. Your mind stayed busy constructing futures, preparing for disappointment, hoping to avoid pain. Now, that mental urgency fades. Not because certainty arrived, but because the heart accepted that certainty was never its responsibility. You stop replaying conversations in search of hidden meanings. Words no longer echo endlessly in your thoughts. You hear what was said, but you don't imprison yourself inside it. The heart no longer seeks reassurance from repetition. It understands that clarity forced too early often harms more than it helps. Silence becomes tolerable, even protective. This shift does not mean you stopped caring about results. It means results no longer define your emotional state. You want good outcomes, but you no longer sacrifice your peace waiting for them. The heart learns that hope does not require pressure. Faith does not demand urgency. Trust grows best when it is not rushed. There was a time when waiting felt unbearable. Stillness felt like failure. You believed that if you were not actively doing something, something would be lost. Now waiting feels different. It feels active in a quieter way. You realize that patience is not inactivity, it is restraint guided by trust. You notice that you no longer explain yourself repeatedly to influence outcomes. You speak once, clearly, and then step back. The need to persuade fades. You understand that what is meant for you does not require convincing. The heart stops negotiating its worth with circumstances. This is where emotional maturity deepens. You stop reacting immediately to uncertainty. You allow space between desire and action. That space gives clarity time to arrive naturally. The heart no longer panics when it does not know the next step. It rests in knowing that direction unfolds when needed. You also stop assigning deadlines to destiny. The pressure of "by now" loosens its grip. You understand that timing beyond you cannot be bullied into alignment. The heart releases its obsession with milestones. It focuses instead on steadiness, presence, and integrity. There is a subtle relief that comes with this surrender. You realize how exhausting it was to manage outcomes mentally, how much energy you spent trying to protect yourself from disappointment. Now that energy returns inward. You use it to stay grounded rather than anxious. The heart feels less scattered. This change also affects how you view effort. You still act where action is required, but you stop overextending emotionally. You give effort without attachment. You show up without clinging. The heart learns that doing its part does not mean carrying the whole result. You begin to accept that some things resolve only when left alone. Some answers arrive only after you stop demanding them. The heart releases the belief that force produces clarity. It learns that clarity often comes after surrender, not before it. This is often when inner conversations quiet down. You no longer argue with reality. You no longer try to convince yourself to feel differently. You allow feelings to exist without rushing to fix them. The heart becomes a place of observation rather than conflict. You may notice that disappointment loses its sharpness. It still appears, but it does not dominate. The heart processes it without spiraling. You understand that disappointment is part of human experience, not proof of failure. This understanding creates emotional resilience. The need for constant signs diminishes as well. You stop searching for confirmation in every small event. You trust that guidance is not fragile. The heart understands that what is written will not miss you due to lack of vigilance. This trust calms the inner restlessness. This shift also reshapes how you approach uncertainty. You no longer treat it as an enemy. You see it as a neutral space where growth happens. The heart stops fearing the unknown and starts respecting it. That respect brings calm instead of anxiety. You may feel less reactive to other people's actions. Their choices no longer dictate your emotional balance. You understand that not everything is about you. The heart stops personalizing what was never personal. This creates emotional freedom. This is the moment when the heart stops bargaining with life. You no longer say, "If only this happens, then I'll be okay." You learn to be okay while waiting. Peace becomes internal rather than conditional. That shift changes everything. You also realize that forcing outcomes often delayed them. The pressure distorted your clarity. Now that the pressure is gone, discernment improves. You see situations more accurately. The heart makes decisions from calm, not fear. This change does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You act when action is aligned. You wait when waiting is wise. The heart becomes disciplined instead of desperate. Discipline sustains peace far longer than urgency ever could. You begin to understand that letting go is not losing control. It is choosing trust over tension. The heart releases what it cannot manage and focuses on what it can. This balance restores inner stability. Eventually, you recognize that this shift was necessary. The heart could not grow while forcing outcomes. It needed to learn reliance, not control. And when it finally did, the struggle softened without explanation. That is when you realize something higher is now guiding the process. There comes a stage where the heart begins to loosen its hold without becoming hard. This is where many people get confused, because detachment usually comes with bitterness. But this time, it doesn't. There is no anger fueling the distance, no resentment driving the withdrawal. You simply step back without hostility. The heart moves away gently, not forcefully, and that gentleness is the sign. Before this shift, letting go felt impossible without emotional damage. You believed that distance would either break you or turn you cold. You thought detachment required pain, blame, or rejection. But now you experience something new. You detach without hatred. You disengage without revenge. The heart remains soft, even while it releases its grip. You notice that memories no longer stab the way they used to. They appear, but they don't hijack your emotions. You can recall without reliving. You can remember without reopening wounds. This is not suppression. This is healing. The heart is no longer trapped inside the past. It can visit and leave freely. There was a time when stepping back meant emotional collapse. Silence felt unbearable. Distance felt like loss. Now silence feels neutral, sometimes even safe. You no longer rush to fill space with explanations or presence. The heart understands that not every gap needs to be closed. Some gaps exist to protect what remains inside you. This shift removes the urge to prove your sincerity through suffering. You no longer believe that pain equals depth. You stop holding on to hurt just to show how much something mattered. The heart learns that care does not require self-destruction. Love does not need to bleed to be real. You also stop rewriting the story to make yourself or others the villain. The need to assign blame fades. You accept that some things simply unfolded as they did. The heart releases judgment because judgment was tying it to the past. Neutral acceptance replaces emotional argument. Detachment without bitterness brings clarity. You see people and situations as they are, not as you wished they would be. Illusions dissolve quietly. There is no dramatic disappointment, only understanding. The heart stops negotiating with reality and starts respecting truth. This is often when emotional boundaries form naturally. You no longer need to announce them. You simply feel when to step back. Access becomes selective, not out of pride, but out of preservation. The heart chooses peace over overexposure. You may notice that forgiveness becomes easier, but reconciliation does not feel necessary. You can release resentment without reopening doors. This balance is rare, and it does not come from emotional numbness. It comes from wisdom settling into the heart. This shift also changes how you view absence. You no longer interpret distance as rejection. You see it as alignment. The heart understands that not everything meant to touch you is meant to stay. This understanding removes the sting from separation. There is a softness in how you disengage now. You don't disappear dramatically. You don't create scenes. You simply reduce emotional investment. The heart withdraws quietly, with dignity intact. That quiet withdrawal is a sign of growth. You stop seeking closure through confrontation. The need for final conversations fades. You accept that some endings do not come with explanations. The heart learns that peace does not require every question to be answered. This detachment also protects you from resentment toward yourself. You stop blaming yourself for feeling deeply. You stop shaming yourself for caring. The heart honors its capacity to love while learning when to release. You begin to notice how light the heart feels without emotional grudges. The constant replaying stops. The inner arguments quiet down. Emotional energy is no longer spent defending the past. That energy becomes available for healing and growth. This shift teaches you that bitterness is not strength. Softness with boundaries is. The heart remains kind without being vulnerable to harm. That balance does not come from experience alone. It comes from guidance. You also realize that detachment does not erase compassion. You still wish well. You still hope good for others, but their journey no longer dictates your emotional state. The heart stays humane without being entangled. There is a new kind of confidence that forms here. Not arrogance, not pride, but stability. You trust yourself not to collapse if something leaves. The heart knows it can survive release without closing itself off. This stage often comes after the heart has been hurt enough to learn discernment. Pain taught you where openness without wisdom leads. Now openness remains, but it is guarded. The heart matures without becoming guarded by fear. You may feel less reactive to emotional triggers that once controlled you. Situations that used to provoke strong responses now pass with little disturbance. The heart observes instead of reacting. Observation brings power. Eventually, you understand that this detachment is not loss, it is refinement. The heart is being cleaned of excess attachment while preserving its ability to feel. What remains is a heart that can love without losing itself. There comes a time when the heart no longer feels safe explaining itself, not because it has nothing to say, but because it has learned where words are wasted. You realize that being understood is not guaranteed just because you speak. Some ears listen only to respond, not to comprehend. In this stage, silence begins to feel like protection rather than punishment. Before this shift, you felt the need to clarify everything. You explained your intentions, your feelings, your reasons. You tried to prevent misunderstanding by offering more detail, but the more you explained, the more drained you felt. The heart slowly recognized that clarity offered to the wrong place becomes self-betrayal. You begin to notice that silence carries more dignity than overexposure. Withholding words no longer feels like suppression, it feels intentional. The heart chooses calm over chaos. You stop fighting to be seen by those who already decided how they view you. This shift changes how you respond to misinterpretation. You no longer rush to correct it. You allow people to believe what they choose, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. The heart understands that truth does not require defense from every misunderstanding. Silence becomes a boundary, not a wall, but a filter. It allows peace in and keeps unnecessary disturbance out. You speak when words will build, not when they will drain. The heart learns that not every emotion deserves expression in every space. You also stop narrating your pain to people who treat it like information instead of trust. You recognize when vulnerability is met with curiosity rather than care. In those moments, silence becomes safer than sharing. The heart protects what is sacred within it. This stage often feels lonely at first. You miss the comfort of being heard, but you slowly realize that being quiet is less painful than being misunderstood. The heart chooses solitude over repeated emotional injury. That choice brings stability. You may notice that your reactions slow down. You pause before speaking. You reflect before responding. Silence gives you time to assess whether words will help or harm. This pause is not hesitation, it is discernment forming. The need to justify your choices fades. You stop explaining why you changed, why you stepped back, why you no longer engage the same way. The heart understands that those meant to understand will not require explanation. Those who demand it often misuse it. Silence also reshapes your relationships. Some connections weaken when explanations disappear. Others deepen when presence replaces words. The heart learns who values essence over explanation. This clarity refines your circle. You begin to realize that constant explanation was a form of seeking approval. When that need dissolves, peace grows. The heart stops asking permission to exist as it is. Silence becomes an act of self-respect. This shift does not make you indifferent. You still communicate where trust exists, but you become selective. Words are offered intentionally, not reactively. The heart learns to speak from calm, not compulsion. You also discover that silence creates space for others to reveal themselves. Without your explanations filling the air, their responses become clearer. The heart observes patterns instead of chasing reassurance. There is power in no longer needing the last word. You release the urge to be right. You choose peace over victory. The heart understands that winning arguments rarely heals wounds. This stage often brings emotional relief. You no longer carry the burden of managing how others perceive you. Their opinions lose weight. The heart feels lighter without that responsibility. You may find that your prayers become quieter as well. Less speaking, more listening. Silence deepens connection. The heart learns that not all communication requires words to be sincere. You start to value presence over explanation. Being becomes more important than proving. The heart settles into authenticity without performance. Silence also teaches patience. You allow situations to unfold without commentary. You trust time to reveal what words could not. This trust calms the inner urgency. You realize that dignity often lives in restraint. Not everything felt needs to be expressed. Not everything experienced needs to be shared. The heart matures through containment. Eventually, silence stops feeling heavy. It becomes spacious, peaceful, grounding. The heart feels safe within itself, without constant expression. And in this silence, you are not alone. You are simply no longer shouting into places that cannot echo back understanding. The heart rests, knowing that what truly matters does not need to be loudly explained. There comes a moment when your emotional energy slowly begins to return to where it was always meant to rest. Before this shift, your feelings were spread everywhere, tied to people, outcomes, expectations, and fears. You woke up thinking about them and went to sleep carrying them. Your heart invested deeply in what it could not control. Then, without forcing it, that energy starts to withdraw. You notice that you are no longer emotionally chasing people or situations. You stop checking for signs, responses, or reassurance. The heart no longer needs constant feedback to feel stable. What once consumed your thoughts now passes through them quietly. This is not because the heart became empty, but because it finally found a safer place to lean. Your prayers begin to change during this time. They become softer, less rushed. You no longer list demands with urgency. Instead, you speak with trust. Sometimes there are fewer words, sometimes only presence. The heart no longer tries to convince, it rests in knowing it is heard. Before, your emotions searched for relief through outcomes. Now they seek relief through connection. You find comfort in turning inward rather than outward. The heart redirects its dependence from creation to the Creator. This shift happens gently, without announcement, but it changes everything. You may realize that your hope is no longer attached to specific scenarios. You still hope, but the hope feels lighter. It is no longer burdened with fear of disappointment. The heart learns that hope grounded in Allah does not collapse when circumstances shift. This stage often comes after emotional fatigue. You gave too much of yourself to what could not sustain you. When the heart reaches that limit, Allah redirects it. Emotional reliance slowly transfers from fragile sources to the one who does not fail. That transfer brings relief. You stop measuring your worth through emotional outcomes. Validation no longer depends on how things unfold. The heart feels valuable even in uncertainty. This sense of worth does not fluctuate with response or rejection. You may notice that anxiety decreases without logical explanation. Situations that once triggered panic now produce quiet concern at most. The heart trusts that it is being carried even when the path is unclear. That trust reduces fear more effectively than answers ever did. Your emotional reactions soften. High highs and low lows even out. You still feel deeply, but not destructively. The heart finds balance instead of extremes. This emotional regulation is not numbness, it is alignment. You also begin to feel less emotionally available to chaos. Drama feels heavy. Unnecessary emotional labor feels draining. The heart becomes selective with where it invests energy. This selectivity protects peace. This shift teaches you that emotional strength does not come from endurance alone. It comes from correct placement of reliance. When reliance is misplaced, emotions suffer. When reliance returns to Allah, emotions stabilize. You may find yourself surrendering outcomes more easily. You say, "I tried," without resentment. You release expectations without bitterness. The heart accepts effort without attachment to results. That acceptance brings freedom. Your inner dialogue changes as well. Self-blame decreases. Harsh inner criticism softens. The heart becomes kinder to itself because it no longer feels alone in responsibility. Compassion grows inwardly. This stage also reduces emotional urgency. You no longer feel that everything must be resolved immediately. Time feels less threatening. The heart trusts that what is meant will unfold without force. You notice that emotional security begins to exist independently of circumstances. Even when things feel uncertain, the heart remains steady. That steadiness does not come from certainty. It comes from surrender. This shift allows you to hold space for others without losing yourself. You can care without absorbing. You can listen without carrying. The heart maintains its boundaries while remaining compassionate. You also become less afraid of loss. Not because loss no longer hurts, but because you trust that what is taken is managed with wisdom. The heart accepts that removal is sometimes protection. Your emotional energy becomes more focused. Instead of being scattered, it centers. Instead of being reactive, it becomes responsive. This focus strengthens clarity and calm. You realize that emotional dependence was exhausting you quietly. Releasing it restores energy you didn't know you lost. The heart feels lighter, more present, more alive. Eventually, you understand that this return of emotional energy was an act of mercy. Allah drew your heart back before it broke. He recentered it before it collapsed. And in doing so, He gave you peace without demanding perfection. At this stage, your heart no longer asks, "Who will carry me?" It rests knowing it already is being carried.